After I had an affair, my husband didn't yell. He didn't hit me. He didn't even leave. Instead, he punished me in a way I never imagined. My husband, David, never touched me again. For 18 years, we lived under the same roof as strangers, sleeping in separate rooms, speaking only when absolutely necessary, pretending to be a normal, loving couple in front of our son and the world. I thought that kind of silence was the cruelest punishment a woman could endure. I was wrong. Because after I retired, a routine medical checkup uncovered a truth that proved the last 18 years were only the beginning of my punishment. And once I understood what had really happened back then, there was no way to unlearn it. Some stories don't reveal their meaning all at once. They ask you to stay, listen carefully, and decide for yourself whether the truth is worth the cost. The waiting room at Riverside Women's Clinic was unusually quiet that morning. No television murmuring in the corner, no magazines rustling. Just the low hum of the air conditioner and the steady ticking of a clock on the wall. I sat with my purse on my lap, twisting the strap between my fingers until my knuckles ached. My name is Laura Bennett. I was 58 years old, recently retired, and for reasons I couldn't yet explain, my heart was beating as if I were about to be sentenced. Dr. Margaret Hayes had been staring at her computer screen longer than usual. She was in her early 50s, calm, precise, the kind of doctor who never rushed her words. That morning, she didn't smile when she turned toward me. "Mrs. Bennett," she said gently, "you're 58, correct?" "Yes," I answered. "I retired last month." She nodded, then hesitated. "I need to ask you a personal question." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Have you and your husband maintained a normal, intimate life over the years?" The room seemed to shrink around me. The question echoed in my head, sharp and unforgiving. I stared at my hands, pale and lined, hands that hadn't been held in nearly 2 decades. "No," I said quietly, "we haven't." Dr. Hayes didn't look shocked. She looked concerned. "How long has it been?" she asked. 18 years. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. "Laura," she said, using my first name now, "long-term emotional and physical deprivation can affect more than mental health. It impacts hormones, immunity, even how the body repairs itself. Silence like that doesn't just damage a marriage, it damages the person living inside it." I swallowed hard. For years, I had told myself I was fine, that I deserved whatever distance existed between my husband and me. "I'd like to run a more detailed examination today," she continued. "If that's all right?" I nodded. I wasn't sure what else I could do. As I followed her down the hallway, memories rose uninvited. My husband, David Bennett, standing in our living room in Maplewood, Connecticut, 18 years earlier. The smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the air. His voice calm, controlled, as he told me we would stay married, but never be husband and wife again. No shouting, no slam doors, just terms, conditions. A sentence delivered without emotion. The exam room was cold. I lay back, staring at the ceiling tiles as Dr. Hayes worked in silence. Minutes passed. Then she stopped. "Laura," she said carefully, "have you ever had gynecological surgery?" I frowned. "No, never." She didn't respond right away. She adjusted the screen, studied it again, then gently set the instrument aside. "Please get dressed," she said. "Let's talk in my office." By the time I sat back in the chair, my mouth was dry. She handed me a cup of water. "The imaging shows scar tissue," she explained, "clear evidence of a surgical procedure involving your uterus." "That's impossible," I said quickly. "I would remember something like that." She shook her head. "The scarring is old, many years old, and very distinct." The word old sent a chill through me. "I don't believe this is a mistake," she continued softly. "Sometimes patients don't remember procedures performed during medical emergencies or heavy sedation. I suggest you go home and think carefully. Perhaps ask a family member." I left the clinic in a daze. The cold air outside bit into my skin, grounding me just enough to walk. Surgery, scar tissue. Years ago. Then a memory surfaced. 2008. The year everything collapsed. I had been 40. Our son, Ethan, had just left for college. The house felt unbearably empty. That was the year I made the worst mistake of my life. The year David discovered my affair. The year my marriage stopped being a marriage. And the night I swallowed too many sleeping pills because I couldn't breathe under the weight of my own guilt. I remembered waking up in a hospital bed, groggy, confused. David sitting beside me, his face unreadable, telling me everything was fine. Had it been? My hands were trembling as I unlocked the front door that afternoon. David was in the living room, reading the newspaper like he always did, as if the past had never caught up with us. "You're back early," he said without looking up. "David," I said, my voice thin, unfamiliar. "I need to ask you something." He folded the paper slowly and finally met my eyes. "In 2008, I said, each word heavy. "Did I have surgery?" The color drained from his face. The newspaper slipped from his hands and hit the floor. In that moment, before he spoke, before he denied anything, I knew. Whatever had been taken from me all those years ago, whatever secret had been buried under silence, was about to come back. And this time, it wasn't going to let either of us hide. David didn't speak. He stood there, frozen, staring at the newspaper on the floor as if it no longer belonged to him. For 18 years I had learned to live inside his silences, but this one was different. This wasn't punishment. This was something closer to fear. "Why are you asking me this now?" he said at last, his voice low. "I went to the doctor," I replied. "She found scar tissue. She says I had surgery. David, I need to know." He turned away from me and walked to the window. Outside, Maplewood looked exactly the same. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, late afternoon light sliding across familiar houses. It felt cruel that the world hadn't changed when mine had just cracked open. "Do you really want the truth?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." He let out a slow breath, as if bracing himself. "That year," he began, "after I found out about the affair, you weren't yourself. You barely slept. You barely ate. One night you collapsed, and I took you to the hospital. I remembered flashes, bright lights, voices, waking up confused, my head heavy, my thoughts scattered. They ran tests," he continued, "routine ones, and that's when they found out." "Found out what?" I whispered, though something deep inside me already knew. "You were pregnant." The word hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant. My knees weakened, and I sat down heavily on the couch. "That can't be right," I said. "I would have known." "They said you were about 3 months along," David replied quietly. 3 months. I did the math without meaning to. David and I hadn't touched each other in far longer than that. "So it wasn't—" My voice broke. "It wasn't yours." He shook his head once. The doctors didn't have to say it out loud. The room felt suddenly too small. "What happened?" I asked. "What happened to the baby?" David closed his eyes. "I made the decision," he said, "while you were unconscious. The air left my lungs." "You mean—" "I signed the consent forms," he said, his voice flat, stripped of emotion. "I didn't think there was any other choice." Tears streamed down my face. "That was my child," I said. "You had no right." He turned toward me then, his composure finally cracking. "And what about my rights?" he said sharply. "Did you think about them when you were with him?" The words hurt because they were true. "You took something from me," I whispered, "and never told me." "I was trying to hold what was left together," he said. "Our son, our family, you." "By punishing me?" I asked. His shoulders sagged. "By surviving." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. Then David's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned before answering. "Hello?" I watched the color drain from his face. "What hospital?" he asked. "We're on our way." He ended the call and turned to me, his eyes wide with panic. "Ethan's been in an accident." The drive blurred into streaks of red lights and white lines. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap they hurt. David drove faster than I'd ever seen him drive. "He'll be okay," I kept saying, more prayer than statement. He has to be. At St. Anne's Medical Center, Emily stood in the hallway holding Lucas, her face pale and wet with tears. He pushed a child out of the street, she sobbed. He got hit instead. A doctor approached us moments later. Your son needs surgery immediately, he said. He's lost a lot of blood. Do whatever you need to do, David said. There's one complication, the doctor added. He has a rare blood type, B negative. Our supply is limited. A direct donation would help. I'm O positive, David said instantly. So am I added. The doctor hesitated. If both parents are type O, he said slowly, it's genetically impossible for a child to be type B. The hallway seemed to tilt. David turned to me. Is that true? I don't know, I said, my voice shaking. Maybe there's a mistake. Before anyone could respond, Emily stepped forward. I'm B negative, she said. Use mine. They rushed her away. Hours later, the surgeon emerged. The surgery was successful, he said. He's stable. Relief crashed over me so hard my legs nearly gave out. We were led into the ICU. Ethan lay pale and still, machines humming softly beside him. When he saw us, his eyes fluttered open. Dad, he whispered. David took his hand. I'm here, son. Ethan swallowed, then looked at him with an expression I didn't recognize. Calm, resolved. Dad, he said quietly, there's something you need to know. My heart began to race. I've always known, he continued softly, that I'm not your biological son. The words landed in the silence like glass shattering. And in that moment, I understood something terrifyingly clear. The truth I thought I was uncovering had only opened the door. What waited on the other side was far worse. David didn't move. For a long moment, he simply stood there, still holding Ethan's hand, as if letting go would make the words disappear. The steady beeping of the monitor filled the silence, slow and merciless. What did you say? David asked finally. His voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Ethan turned his head slightly, wincing at the effort. I've always known, he repeated. I just didn't know how to say it, or when. I felt my chest tighten. Ethan, I said quickly, you've been through surgery, you're exhausted, this isn't— Mom, he interrupted gently. That single word stopped me. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something that made my stomach drop. Not anger, not confusion. Pity, I found out when I was 17, he said softly. By accident. David lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, his knees seeming to give way all at once. Found out how? Ethan stared at the ceiling for a moment, gathering strength. I was cleaning the study, looking for old paperwork for school. I found a folder with medical records. My birth certificate. My heart began to pound. My blood type was listed as B negative, Ethan continued. But that same year we had a school health screening. The nurse told me I was B positive. I remembered that day. Ethan coming home pale, unusually quiet. I'd asked if he was sick. He'd said he was just tired. I didn't say anything at first, he said. I told myself it was a mistake, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. David's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. So, what did you do? I waited until I turned 18, Ethan replied. Then I ordered a paternity test online. I did it myself. Secretly. The room seemed to tilt. I reached for the railing at the foot of the bed to steady myself. The results came back a few weeks later, he said. Probability of paternity, less than 1%. David let out a broken sound and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders began to shake. I didn't want to know who my biological father was, Ethan said quickly. I never looked for him. I didn't care. I already had a dad. David looked up then, his eyes red and wet. Then why tell me now? Because you deserve the truth, Ethan answered. And because when I was lying there earlier, bleeding, I thought I might die. And I didn't want this to be the last thing between us. My legs felt weak. You've been carrying this alone all these years? Ethan nodded slightly. I didn't want to break this family. I didn't want to hurt you. Or Dad. David reached out and gripped Ethan's hand with both of his. "You didn't break anything," he said, his voice cracking. "None of this is on you." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "You're still my father," he whispered. "No matter what the test says." David broke then. Not the controlled, silent breaking I'd lived with for 18 years, but something raw and uncontained. He bowed his head, pressing his forehead to Ethan's knuckles, sobbing openly. "I was so proud of you," he said between breaths, "every single day." "I know," Ethan replied. "That's why I stayed quiet." A heavy silence settled over the room, thick with everything we'd never said. Then David slowly lifted his head and turned toward me. His eyes were no longer cold, they were devastated. "Who was it?" he asked quietly. I couldn't speak. "Laura," he said, his voice rising. "If he's not mine, then who?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I swear I don't." He let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know?" My mind raced backward, past the affair with Ryan, past the years of marriage, past the early days I thought were simple and honest. And then a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. Before the wedding, my bachelorette party. Too much wine, too much laughter, someone insisting on walking me home because I could barely stand. A face I hadn't thought about in decades. "Daniel," I said, the name slipping out before I could stop it. David stiffened. "Daniel who?" "Daniel Wright," I whispered. "Your best friend. Our best man." The air in the room turned heavy, almost unbreathable. David stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Daniel moved to Europe right after the wedding," he said slowly. "You're telling me—" "I didn't know," I cried. "I don't remember it clearly. I thought it was a nightmare. I thought nothing happened. But something did," David said, his voice dangerously calm. "Something that changed my entire life." Ethan stirred weakly. "Dad," he murmured, "none of this changes what you mean to me." David didn't answer. He stared at the floor, fists clenched, decades of pride, certainty, and humiliation crashing down at once. "Get out," he said suddenly. My heart skipped. "What?" "I need air," he said. "I can't look at you right now." I backed toward the door, my legs trembling. As I stepped into the hallway, I looked back one last time. David stood beside the bed, shattered but still there. Ethan lay pale and exhausted, watching his father with quiet devotion. And in that moment, a truth settled deep inside me. The worst thing I had done wasn't the affair. It was the silence that followed, and the lives it quietly destroyed while I pretended nothing was wrong. I don't remember leaving the ICU. I only remember the hallway. Too white, too bright, and the feeling that my lungs were no longer working the way they should. I leaned against the wall until my legs gave out and slid down onto the cold floor, pulling my knees to my chest like a child trying to disappear. For years, I believed the worst punishment David had given me was silence. Now I understood the truth. The real punishment was watching the life he built collapse, and knowing I was the reason. Behind that door was a man who had just learned that his pride, his certainty, his identity as a father had been torn away in a single sentence. And I was standing on the outside, exactly where I belonged. I don't know how long I sat there before someone knelt beside me. "Laura," Emily said softly. I looked up. Her eyes were red, but there was no anger in them. Only exhaustion, the kind that comes from loving people through impossible things. "Ethan told me," she said. "Everything." I waited for the words I deserved. The accusations, the blame. They never came. "He said that no matter what the blood test says," Emily continued, "David is his father, and always will be." Something inside me finally broke. I covered my face and sobbed, deep, uncontrollable sobs that shook my entire body. "I destroyed him," I cried. "I destroyed all of you." Emily shook her head gently. "Ethan is alive," she said. "That matters more than anything right now." Alive. The word steadied me enough to stand. Ethan was moved out of the ICU 2 days later. David never left his side. He slept in the chair, ate when nurses reminded him, spoke only when necessary. When staff asked who he was, he answered without hesitation, "I'm his father. Not stepfather, not guardian, father." I stayed in the background, bringing clean clothes, coffee, anything I could think of. Sometimes I watched through the glass as David sat by Ethan's bed, their heads bent close together, speaking in low voices I couldn't hear. Ethan would cry. David would grip his hand and whisper something that made him nod. They were grieving together, and I was not part of it. A week later, Ethan was discharged. We didn't return to our house in Maplewood. Instead, we went to Emily and Ethan's place so he could recover. They gave Ethan the main bedroom. David took the small guest room at the end of the hall. I was placed in the room next to his. That first night, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, the hum of traffic, a distant siren, footsteps from the apartment above us. Through the thin wall, I heard David shift in his bed. I held my breath, hoping he might speak. He didn't. Near dawn, I heard the soft scrape of a sliding door. I got up quietly and followed the sound to the balcony. David stood there, silhouetted against the city lights, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He had quit smoking years ago. "David," I said softly. He didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "It's cold." "I know," I replied. "So are you." He took a long drag, then exhaled slowly. "I wanted to hate you," he said flatly. "I wanted to tear everything apart, walk away, burn it all down." My hands trembled. "I would understand." "That's the problem," he said. "I don't want to understand anymore." He finally turned to face me. In the dim light, his face looked hollowed out, like something essential had been carved away. "Ethan said something to me today," he continued. "He said that for 28 years, the love we gave each other was real, and that it was enough." Tears filled my eyes. "It was real," I whispered. "Yes," he said. "And that's why this hurts more than anything else." He crushed the cigarette against the railing. "There's no going back, Laura. Every memory we have is contaminated now." My chest tightened. "Then what do we do?" He was silent for a long time. The wind tugged at his jacket, lifting it slightly, as if urging him to leave. "For Ethan," he said finally, "and for Lucas, we keep doing what we've been doing." I looked at him. "Meaning? In public, we're a family," he said. "Parents, grandparents. We show up when it matters." His eyes hardened. "At home, we're roommates. Nothing more." The words were familiar, too familiar. "This time," he added quietly, "it's not punishment. It's survival." He walked past me and went back inside. I stayed on the balcony long after he was gone, hugging myself against the cold, understanding something I had avoided for years. 18 years ago, I thought the worst thing David did was stop touching me. Now I knew better. The worst thing was this: that even after every truth was finally exposed, he was still choosing to stay. And I was no longer sure whether that was mercy, or the final price I would spend the rest of my life paying. Some truths don't explode all at once. They sink in slowly. And only then do you realize how much they've already taken from you. Life didn't fall apart after that night. It narrowed. Days began to move in straight lines instead of circles. Wake up. Check on Ethan. Make coffee. Answer messages. Sit quietly when there was nothing left to do. The chaos I expected never came. What replaced it was something worse: control without warmth. Ethan recovered steadily. He worked from the guest room, his laptop balanced on a pillow, his voice calm during calls, as if nothing in his life had cracked open. Lucas filled the apartment with noise and motion, running from room to room, asking questions no one knew how to answer honestly. David and I learned how to exist in the same space without touching the same air. We spoke when necessary, logistics only, appointments, groceries, Lucas's school schedule. There were no arguments, no accusations, just distance carefully maintained, like a wound everyone pretended wasn't there. One afternoon, Lucas sat on the floor beside me, lining up toy cars. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "why doesn't Grandpa sleep with you?" The question landed without cruelty, Just curiosity. I felt my chest tighten. People sleep in different rooms sometimes, I said carefully. But my mom and dad sleep together, he replied. And they hold hands. I glanced toward the kitchen. David stood at the counter, his back to us, completely still. Every family is different, I said softly. Lucas accepted that answer the way children often do, without pushing. But the damage was already done. Even a child could see the shape of what we were pretending not to be. That evening, after Lucas went to bed, Ethan asked me to sit with him. I need to say something, he said quietly. I braced myself. I don't blame you, he said. Not the way you think I do. My throat tightened. You should. He shook his head. I blame the silence. The years nobody spoke. That did more damage than the truth ever could. I looked down at my hands. I thought keeping things quiet was protecting you. It wasn't, he replied gently. It just taught me how to pretend. Those words stayed with me long after I returned to my room. A week later, we went back to Maplewood to collect more belongings from the house. Walking inside felt like stepping into a life that belonged to strangers. The walls were bare. The rooms echoed. David moved through the space methodically, packing books, labeling boxes. When he reached our bedroom, he stopped. I'll take care of this room, he said. I didn't argue. In the hallway, I paused in front of a framed photograph, David holding Ethan as a baby, his face full of pride and certainty. I almost reached for it. Then I let my hand fall. That night, after we returned to the apartment, David spoke for the first time without necessity driving the conversation. I'm selling the house, he said. I nodded. That makes sense. There's too much history there, he added. Too many versions of us that don't exist anymore. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not grief, but acceptance. I'll find my own place, he continued. Close enough for Ethan and Lucas, not close enough to keep reopening things. And me? I asked quietly. He met my eyes. You'll do what you've always done, he said. You'll survive. The truth of it didn't sting the way I expected. It simply settled. That night, lying alone, I realized something painful and clear. For 18 years, I had believed my punishment was being unloved. I was wrong. My punishment was learning, too late, that silence doesn't preserve a family. It only delays the moment when everyone finally understands what they've already lost. The house in Maplewood sold faster than I expected. A young couple with a toddler stood in the living room, smiling, talking about paint colors and school districts. They said it felt warm. I wondered if houses absorbed lies the way walls absorbed smoke. David shook their hands. I signed the papers. Just like that, 30 years of life became a transaction. On the day we handed over the keys, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. No furniture, no photos. Just the faint outlines on the walls where frames had once hung. In the bedroom, the carpet was lighter where our bed used to be. A ghost of a marriage burned into the floor. David waited by the door. You ready? He asked. Yes, I said. And for once, it wasn't a lie. We moved into 2 small apartments in the same neighborhood, 10 minutes apart. Close enough for Ethan's recovery, close enough for Lucas. Far enough that silence no longer pressed in from the other side of a wall. The first night alone in my new place, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and listened to the refrigerator hum. No footsteps, no television, no tension disguised as peace. I cried, but not the desperate, choking kind. This was quieter, grief mixed with something like relief. Ethan healed well. Each week he walked farther, laughed easier, complained about work again. Life, stubborn and unapologetic, kept moving. One afternoon he called me. Mom, he said, Dad's been sleeping on the couch again. My chest tightened. Since when? Since we moved, he replied. He won't say why. I knew why. Some habits don't belong to places. They belong to guilt. That evening, David stopped by to drop off paperwork. He looked thinner, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Sit, I said, surprising us both. He did. I'm not here to argue, I added. I just want to say something. He nodded. You stayed, I said. For Ethan, for Lucas, For me, in your own way. I see that now. He looked down at his hands. Staying doesn't mean healing. I know, I said softly. But leaving isn't always courage either. Silence stretched between us. Not sharp, not cruel, just honest. I'm thinking about going away for a while, he said at last. Where? Washington State, he replied. Somewhere quiet. I need to hear my own thoughts without them bouncing off old walls. How long? I don't know, he admitted. Weeks. Maybe more. I nodded. That might be good. He looked up, surprised. You're not angry? I'm tired of being angry, I said. It never fixed anything. He stood to leave, hesitated, then said, Take care of yourself, Laura. Not we'll talk, not I'll miss you. Just that. David left 2 days later. Life adjusted again. I focused on my health, physical therapy, long walks, follow-up appointments at Riverside Women's Clinic. Dr. Hayes smiled more now, not because everything was fine, but because I was finally present. I asked questions. I listened. I stopped treating my body like a sentence I had to serve. One evening, Ethan invited me over for dinner. Lucas ran to the door, wrapping his arms around my legs. Grandma! He shouted. Dad made pasta, and it's bad. Ethan groaned. It's not bad. It's healthy, Lucas corrected. We laughed. The sound felt unfamiliar. And good. After dinner, while Lucas colored at the table, Ethan sat beside me. I talked to Dad, he said, before he left. And? He said something I think you should hear. Ethan paused. He said he doesn't hate you. He's just tired of carrying everything alone. My throat tightened. I never wanted him to carry it alone. I know, Ethan said gently, but silence makes people carry things by themselves anyway. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window and watched the city lights blink on one by one. I thought about David somewhere far away, trying to remember who he was before pride and betrayal reshaped him. I thought about Ethan, who had carried a truth no child should have to hold. And I thought about myself. How many years I had spent believing endurance was the same as atonement. It wasn't. Endurance was just surviving the damage. Healing meant stopping the lie that suffering alone made things right. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around punishment. Not forgiveness, not reunion. Just honesty. And as I turned off the light and went to bed in a room that belonged only to me, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for David to come back. Not for the past to change. Not for permission to live. Whatever came next would come without pretending. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. David didn't call while he was away. At first, I checked my phone too often. Every quiet buzz made my heart jump, then sink. After a while, I stopped checking it all. Silence, I had learned, wasn't always abandonment. Sometimes it was someone trying not to drown. Life continued in small, ordinary ways. Ethan returned to the office part-time. He complained about traffic, about meetings that could have been emails, about how tired he still felt in the afternoons. I listened the way mothers do, without fixing, without interrupting. Lucas started asking questions again. Children always do, once they feel safe. Grandma, he said one evening while we were walking to the park. Is Grandpa coming back? I paused. He might, I said carefully. And he might not. Lucas frowned, processing this. Did you make him go away? The question pierced deeper than I expected. No, I said softly. Sometimes grown-ups leave because they're trying to understand themselves. Lucas nodded, satisfied. Okay. Children didn't need perfect answers. They needed honest ones. Weeks passed. Leaves began to change color. The world shifted seasons without asking anyone's permission. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. David. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring twice. 3 times. Not to punish him, only to make sure I wasn't answering out of fear. Hello, I said. I'm back, he said. No greeting, no preamble. Where are you? Still in Washington, he replied. But I'll be home tomorrow. I waited. I'm not calling to fix anything, he added. I just didn't want you to hear it from Ethan. I appreciate that, I said honestly. There was a pause. How are you? I thought about it. I'm not pretending anymore. He exhaled, a sound half laugh, half sigh. Good. Neither am I. When he returned, we didn't meet right away. 2 days later, Ethan invited us both over for dinner. The table felt smaller than it used to, but warmer. Lucas talked nonstop about school. Ethan teased him. I caught David watching them when he thought no one noticed. After dinner, while Lucas brushed his teeth, Ethan leaned back in his chair. I want to say something, he said. And I want you both to listen. David nodded. So did I. I spent years thinking our family was broken, Ethan continued. Now I think it was just quiet in the wrong ways. David swallowed. I don't need you to be married, Ethan said. I don't need you to pretend. I just need you to be honest. With me and with yourselves. No one spoke for a moment. David was the first to break the silence. I don't know what I can give, he said. But I know I don't want to disappear anymore. That's enough, Ethan replied. Later, as David walked me to my car, the night air cool and still, he stopped beside the curb. I don't regret raising him, he said suddenly. Not for 1 second. I know, I replied. But I regret how long I lived like I didn't matter, he added. And how long I made you believe you didn't either. The words settled between us. Not as forgiveness, not as reconciliation, but as truth. I'm not asking for anything, I said quietly. Not anymore. He nodded. Neither am I. We stood there for a moment longer. Two people who had finally stopped measuring their lives by what was missing. As I drove home, I realized something that felt both heavy and freeing. Some families don't heal by going back to what they were. They heal by letting go of who they were pretending to be. And maybe that was the only kind of healing that ever really lasted. Sometimes the hardest part of a story isn't the betrayal or the truth. It's the quiet moment when everyone finally stops pretending and realizes what that honesty will cost. After that dinner, something subtle changed. Not between David and me, but in the space around us. There was less tension, less waiting for the other person to speak first. We no longer circled each other like strangers sharing old memories. We moved forward separately, occasionally crossing paths, without pretending those paths would merge again. Ethan noticed it too. One afternoon, he called me from work. Dad seems lighter, he said. Still quiet, but different. I think he finally stopped fighting the truth, I replied, and started listening to it. That evening, David came by to drop off a box of old documents he'd found while unpacking. Tax records, warranties, manuals, pieces of a life once shared. There's something else, he said, hesitating at the door. I found this. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. My handwriting. A letter I had written years ago and never sent. I don't expect forgiveness. I just don't want you to think my silence means I don't care. My chest tightened. I don't even remember writing this. You wrote it the year after everything happened, David said quietly. I found it in a drawer. You never gave it to me. I didn't think I deserved to, I said. He looked at the letter for a long moment. I wish you had. The words were simple. They landed hard. I didn't know how to read it back then, he added. I only knew how to survive. So did I thought. Just differently. A week later, Ethan called again, this time with news. I've been offered a position in Denver, he said. Long term. Better hours. More stability. My heart skipped. That's wonderful. It is, he said. Then, more cautiously, but it means moving. When? I asked. Early next year if I accept. I didn't hesitate. You should. There was silence on the line. You're sure? Yes, I said firmly. Your life doesn't need to pause because ours broke. He exhaled, relieved. I was hoping you'd say that. That night, David and I met for coffee. Not to discuss logistics, not to relive the past, just to talk. Ethan told me about Denver, David said. And? I asked. And he should go, David replied without hesitation. I raised him to build something better than what we handed him. I nodded. That's love. David looked at me then. Really looked at me. You know, he said slowly, for a long time, I thought love was endurance. Staying. Holding the line no matter how much it hurt. And now? I asked. And now I think love is letting go before the damage spreads, he said. The truth of it settled quietly between us. Fall deepened. Leaves turned copper and gold. Lucas started school and came home every day with stories too big for his small body to contain. Ethan and Emily began planning the move. Boxes appeared in their living room, labeled and stacked. One evening, Lucas climbed onto my lap while I was reading. "Grandma," he said, "will you come visit us in the mountains?" I smiled. "Of course." "And Grandpa too?" he asked. I paused, then said, "That's up to him." Lucas nodded, satisfied. Children understood choice better than adults ever did. The night before Ethan and Emily made their final decision, they invited David and me over. "We wanted you both here," Ethan said. "No pressure, just honesty." They told us they were accepting the offer. Denver, a fresh start. David stood and hugged Ethan tightly. "I'm proud of you," he said. When it was my turn, I held my son and felt something close to peace. Later, as David and I walked out together, he said, "I think this is where our roles change." "Yes," I agreed. "Parents to grandparents, protectors to supporters." He smiled faintly. "That might be the only transition I'm ready for." Driving home, I realized something important. For years, my life had been defined by what I had broken. Now, it was being reshaped by what I was choosing not to break anymore. Not Ethan's future, not Lucas's sense of safety, not my own fragile chance at honesty. The past would always be there, but for the first time, it wasn't standing in the doorway, blocking the way forward. It was behind me, and I was finally walking on. Winter arrived early that year. The kind of winter that turned the sky gray by mid-afternoon and made everything feel quieter than it already was. Ethan and Emily finalized their plans. Boxes filled their apartment. Lucas counted down the days like it was a holiday. David and I helped where we could, packing books, labeling kitchenware, pretending we weren't memorizing every ordinary detail. On the morning they left, we stood in the parking lot wrapped in coats, breath visible in the cold air. Ethan hugged me first, long and tight. "I'll call," he said. "A lot." "I know," I replied, "and I'll come visit." David hugged him next. There were no speeches, just a firm grip and a quiet, "Be good to yourself." Lucas ran back one last time and threw his arms around my legs. "Don't forget me," he said seriously. I knelt and kissed his forehead. Impossible. When their car disappeared down the street, something inside me finally let go. Not with pain, with acceptance. Life became smaller after that. Quieter mornings, fewer grocery items, fewer reasons to check the weather in another state. I filled my days with routines I'd never allowed myself before. Yoga classes, long walks by the river, coffee with acquaintances who didn't know my history and didn't need to. One afternoon, I ran into David at the market. "Coffee?" he asked, almost casually. "Sure," I said. We sat by the window, watching snow fall in slow, deliberate flakes. For a while, we talked about nothing. Prices, traffic, a movie he'd half-watched on the plane back from Washington. Then he said, "Therapy's harder than I expected." I looked at him. "That usually means it's working." He smiled faintly. "I realized something last week." "What?" "I thought staying made me strong," he said, "but it just made me rigid, afraid to move." I nodded. "Pain doesn't always teach the right lessons." "No," he agreed. "Sometimes it just teaches you how to endure the wrong ones." There was no bitterness in his voice, just clarity. A few days before Christmas, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a framed photo. Ethan and Lucas standing in front of snow-dusted mountains, both grinning. On the back, Ethan had written, "We're okay." Really. I held the frame for a long time. That night, David called. "They sent me the same picture," he said. "Good," I replied. "You deserve it." There was a pause. "Laura, I want to say something." I waited, I forgive you, he said quietly. Not because everything's fine, and not because it doesn't matter, but because I don't want to carry this forever. Tears welled in my eyes, unexpected and sharp. Thank you, I whispered. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back, he added gently. It just means we stop bleeding each other. I understand, I said. And I did. We ended the call without promises. Christmas passed quietly. No big gatherings, just lights in the windows and messages sent across states. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my balcony and watched fireworks bloom faintly in the distance. I thought about the woman I had been. Afraid, silent, convinced that suffering was the price of survival. I thought about the woman I was becoming. Still flawed, still responsible, but no longer hiding. As the clock turned, I didn't make a wish. I made a decision. Whatever time I had left, I would live it awake. Not erasing the past, not begging for a different ending. Just choosing, every day, not to add another lie to the ones already told. And as the last firework faded into smoke, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, peace. The kind that comes when nothing else is left unresolved. Spring returned quietly. No announcements, no dramatic shifts. Just longer days, softer light, and the slow realization that life was continuing, whether I felt ready or not. I planted herbs on my windowsill. Basil, rosemary, thyme. I liked the way caring for something small and living grounded my mornings. Growth, I learned, didn't need witnesses. Ethan called every Sunday, sometimes twice. He talked about work, about the mountains, about how Lucas had learned to ride a bike without training wheels. I listened, laughed at the right places, asked questions I genuinely wanted the answers to. One afternoon, he said, "Dad's coming to visit next month." I paused. "Are you okay with that?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I want him here." So did I, though not in the way I once would have. David visited in early May. He looked healthier, not younger, lighter. We met at a cafe near the park, the kind of neutral place that didn't carry history in its walls. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "Of course," I replied. We walked for a while, side by side, not touching. Watching children run past us, couples argue quietly, elderly pairs moving at their own careful pace. "I used to think my life ended the day everything came out," David said suddenly. "Now I think it just changed direction." I nodded. Endings are rarely as final as they feel. He stopped walking and turned to me. "I don't regret loving you," he said. "Even knowing everything." My chest tightened. Not with longing, but with something steadier. "I don't regret loving you either," I said. "I regret the damage, not the feeling." He smiled faintly. "That's the most honest thing we've said to each other in decades." We didn't hug when we parted. We didn't promise to stay close. We simply acknowledged each other and moved on. That summer, I visited Ethan and his family in Denver. The mountains were breathtaking. Lucas dragged me outside every morning, insisting I see something new. A bird, a rock, a cloud shaped like a dragon. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Lucas climbed onto my lap. "Grandma," he said, "are you happy now?" I thought carefully before answering. "I'm peaceful," I said. "And that's better." He nodded, satisfied, and ran off to play. On my last night there, Ethan hugged me tightly. "You did the hard part," he said. "What hard part?" I asked. "Stopping the pretending," he replied. On the flight home, I looked out the window and watched the land stretch endlessly below me. I thought about how much of my life I had spent shrinking myself to fit into silence. I wouldn't do that again. Back in my apartment, I opened a drawer and found the letter from years ago, the one I never sent. I reread it once, then tore it carefully in half. Some words didn't need to be carried forward. I didn't get the ending people expect in stories like this. There was no reunion, no redemption arc wrapped in romance, no neat resolution where everything made sense. But I got something better. I got truth, spoken out loud. I got accountability, accepted, not avoided. I got a future that wasn't built on punishment. And for the first time in a very long life, that was enough. Because some stories aren't meant to teach you how to fix what's broken. They're meant to teach you how to live honestly with what can't be fixed. If you stayed until the end, perhaps this wasn't just my story, but a reminder that silence has a cost. And truth, even when it comes late, still gives us a choice.